Do Ontario's former premiers still stand by the policies they became known for? The Premier Files explores all of that and much more. What was it like being sworn in as the first Liberal Premier in 42 years?
Well, I didn't bear, the weight of history on my shoulders. I didn't think I was anything special because of that.
He was Ontario's 20th Premier and historically one of the most important because in 1985, he helped end the 42-year-long Conservative dynasty. 2 years later, he won the biggest majority in Ontario history. 3 years after that, he was out of politics altogether. The dramatic tenure of David Peterson. We talked about it at his home north of Toronto. David Peterson, thank you for having us to your place here. This is beautiful.
I'm delighted to have you. It's nice to sit down and have a yap.
Let's have a yap. Let's go all the way back, the early years. What do we need to know about Clarence and Marie Peterson, your parents?
Well, I consider myself one of the luckiest people on earth because I was born into a family that put their kids first. They both came out of, my dad more so, out of real deprivation. There were 13 kids. It was a Norwegian family in Saskatchewan. They didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have enough heat. I mean, he told stories about the four kids all sleeping in one bed. And it was during the Depression. And it was at a time when not only things were tough, but nobody thought they were going to get any better. And there weren't governmental supports. And my dad, fortunately, was brilliant. But he left home when he was 13 years old, and he had to grow up on his own. He had no particular education. He ended up self-educated, and his best friend was the president of the university. He was a highly literate man, my father, and he used to read his poetry and things like that, but all on his own. He didn't want his boys to suffer the deprivations he had.
What do you mean he left home at 13? To do what?
He moved to the big city, and he lived with a brother, and he went to school for a year or two, and then he started to work.
And the big city meaning Regina?
Regina, in the West. And then he got involved in politics. Don't forget, things were tough then. And he was actually a founding signatory of the CCF.
The Regina Manifesto.
The Regina Manifesto. And he helped organize the On to Ottawa strike. So he was an activist as a young guy because he saw so much deprivation. And again, no hope. So when after the war, they came to Ontario. He came with no money, $50 and a wife, and built his future here in Ontario.
Why did he come to Ontario?
Because there was nowhere else to go. Because there were no opportunities in Saskatchewan then. And he had nothing but his own ambition and his own brains. And he had a variety of jobs. And when we were young, we didn't have a lot. I remember that. But I always thought we had a lot because there was so much love in the family and so much support. My mom had been a school teacher. My mom had gone to university. One of the few women in those days that went to university. I was a teacher.
What city was this in?
In London, Ontario.
So why'd they pick London?
Well, he started a business and over the years was quite successful.
Ran for council.
He was on the council. He actually ran twice in politics. He ran against John Robarts in 1955, and he ran in 63 for the federal Liberals. Now, don't forget, there were no Liberals in London, Ontario in those days. It was the most conservative city.
But he was CCF originally.
He was
So how did he end up with the Liberals?
He matured. He grew up. You can't be a CCFer and a socialist forever. But he was very, very practical and a good businessman. And he understood that part of life and that part of, should we say, political stewardship. But he also understood the need of government to help people. And he never lost his caring or his advice to his boys saying, look, the more you have, the more you owe. And you cannot be happy on this earth if you're not doing something for somebody else. And my mom was the same way. And so we were raised in that environment. Lots of love, but responsibilities for others.
You say we, you were the middle of three boys.
I'm middle of three boys, three of us. And we were, mischievous, and we caused lots of trouble, but we grew up in this loving atmosphere.
Do you think your father's running for public office planted some kind of seed in you to do the same?
Well, I remember knocking on doors for him when I was a little kid. I didn't really know what I was doing. And you knock on the door and say, "Will you please vote for my dad?" And, nice people would invite you and give you a cookie. And it was kind of a charming little experience. But I was always interested in politics. From the time I was a little boy, I read the newspaper, I was politically aware, not in a partisan sense, but in a, it was the lifeblood of the country. And, when I went on in high school and in university, I'd go and listen to every politician that came to the campus. In those days, politicians always visited the local campus and made a speech. And so it always was an interest of mine. I didn't have any ambitions to run. It was never particularly part of my life. I didn't see myself as running one day. But that's just was sort of serendipitous, kind of happened.
Do you remember what age you were when you finally said to yourself, I think I want to do this?
Well, kind of when I did it.
That late?
Yeah, I was that late.
So your 30s?
Yeah, I was about 30, and I had gotten married, and it was a terribly sort of complicated set of situations because Shelley's father had been the national president of the Conservative Party. He was a big shot conservative. And the first political convention I went to was a conservative convention when he was running for president. And so the family all went. We just had gotten married. And we were supporting Don for that.
So why aren't you a Tory?
Because I don't believe in what the Tories believe in. I inherited that philosophy that it's not about us, it's about other people, and that government can be an instrument for good. And I'm just far more comfortable with the mainstream philosophy of the Liberal Party.
You're only 31 when you ran for MPP. You won London Centre. Did you think you were going to win that election?
Yeah, but I always think I'm going to win. We put enormous effort into that, Stephen. I knew enough about politics that you had to work like a donkey, that you had to deliver people to a room. And so when I decided to run, Shelley worked full-time on this, and we knocked on doors, and we got people to come out. And we had a huge nomination meeting. I think I'm correct in saying it was the largest nomination meeting in the history of Ontario up till that point in time. There was something like 3,000 people there. And we got everybody we knew, and my mom and my dad, and they came and they helped, and it was a big fight with a guy that already had been ahead of me and wanted the seat. Don't forget, the landscape was a little different in 1975, and Nixon was the leader. It all changed during that campaign, but we put on a good show in London, Ontario, with two other chaps that I ran with, and all three of us won.
A year later, Bob Nixon has stepped down as leader. There's a new leadership race afoot, and you decide at 32 you want to be the leader of the Ontario Liberals. How did you come to that decision?
That's incredibly presumptuous. Nobody could do that. The answer is I didn't have any plan. And I remember going to the first caucus meeting, and Bob Nixon stepped down. He resigned. And all these people in the room, I didn't know any of them because I'd hardly ever been part of the party, shall we say. And it just kind of took off after that. I was hanging around and people come and say, "Why don't you run for leader?" I said, "Well, I don't know anything." And they said, "Well, yeah, you can learn." And it developed, and remarkably over a very short period of time. And so I said, okay. I had so much to learn, it was embarrassing, but I learned an enormous amount and put together a campaign, and we almost won.
You lost by 45 votes to Stuart Smith.
Stuart Smith.
And like, were you crushed after coming so
no,
close?
I wasn't. No, I wasn't crushed. I don't like losing, but I'm not. I can wear. I've had enough defeats in my life. I can wear them fairly well.
Dr. Smith had the misfortune of running a couple of general elections against a guy named Bill Davis. So he went 0 for 2, and then the leadership became available again. Was it a slam dunk that you were going to run for it when the leadership became available again?
De facto, I was sort of the senior guy. Just because I had run once, it gives you a little bit of cred. I had traveled the province from one end to the other in the leadership, and during that, I was the senior critic as the finance critic, working with Stuart. I'd been involved in the campaigns, so it seemed like a natural, even though there were a lot of very talented people in that caucus.
You beat Sheila Copps.
Sheila Copps was there, but there was a lot of other talented people as well.
I'm guessing that the summer of 1984 was one of the worst of your political life, in as much as Mr. Trudeau finally leaves, John Turner comes in, and 4 of the members of your caucus, senior people in your caucus, all decide we're going to go run for Turner because we actually don't think Peterson's got a chance to be premier and we want a shot to be in government. And they quit on you. And I wonder how bleak things looked in that summer of '84.
Well, I remember that in vivid detail. We were in Grand Bend, Ontario, where we rented a cottage. Shelley did a play. Shelley's an actress, and she did one play a year, and I looked after the kids. And I was, had these family obligations. So they were walking with their feet. There was no doubts about that. I think they all ended up regretting it. But that's life in politics, and they sought their own personal situation as they saw fit.
Let me get inside your head, though, a little bit more on that, because do I assume you thought to yourself at this time, our numbers are not great in the polls. I've just had 4 senior people leave me. Bill Davis is at 50 points in the polls. There ain't no way I'm winning the next election. Did you think that?
Never.
You never thought that. Why not?
I'd never give up. When I started that campaign, I was 20 points behind and won. And I remind you, I've been 20 points ahead and lost. Things move very fast, and we have the capacity to change things, and that's one of the joys of democracy. So I knew we had to do a lot of things right. When I took over the party in 1982, it was like taking over a bankrupt company. There was no money. There was a team, but it needed to be bolstered.
The Tories had been in power your whole life.
My whole life.
The first clue that the script might be different was when Bill Davis arrived at Queen's Park with wife Kathleen and son Neil. Until then, why else would the Premier call the cabinet together on Thanksgiving Day?
When Bill Davis decided to step down, Thanksgiving 1984, he makes the decision to step down. They replace him as leader the following year. That clearly changed the dynamic. How did you think differently about your chances at that point?
Well, I'll tell you the thing that changed the dynamic more than anything was Mulrooney winning in 1984. This completely changed the politics of Canada. And let me tell you why. There was not one Liberal government in Canada in 1984. If you trace the history, you'll see that there tends to be one government in one place and one in the other. So this said to me, this country is ready for change.
When Frank Miller called that election for May 2nd, 1985, at the beginning of the election campaign, how did you think it would turn out?
We were 100% ready.
And 20 points behind.
And 20 points behind. But you look back, I remember that time. The minute the campaign was called, a bus pulled up in front of Queen's Park with Liberal written on it, and we were ready to go that night. And and so we gathered all this momentum. We got on the bus, we went down to Fort Erie. There was a big rally in Fort Erie when Ray Haggerty was running. If you remember Ray Haggerty, we had some wonderful characters in our caucus. And we were going, and everybody else was still waiting to start up the machines. And I'll remember one other thing that I think had a big influence, and it shows you the influence of small things in politics. We went down to Fort Erie, and we checked into some motel. It was some kind of roadside motel. This was not a fancy place. Before this dinner and rally, and I decided to go for a jog, because I had, just for my own sanity. So I changed, was running down the highway on my own, no staff, no security, nothing like that. And I remember this Chantal Hébert, who was on the gallery at that point with a French crew, saw me running down the road and got out with her cameras and took pictures. So you can see, and it wasn't planned, but there was a sense of energy and dynamism and moving in the campaign. It started the campaign that way and carried on for 36 days.
That became the meme of the campaign. You in a jogging suit.
By accident. And, you know, you'd almost think we thought of it. We didn't. And then we gathered up the energy. Unfortunately, Frank decided to take the party in a different direction, and he wouldn't debate, and we would. And we just had energy, and every day we were growing in that campaign. Every piece of luck you could possibly have, we had. And sometimes you get lucky in this business, sometimes you don't. But we were lucky in all respects. And we had some fabulous people running. And the campaign, there were no major gaffes in that campaign. And it was a very progressive campaign, very, very, very thought out. And we were aggressively putting forward a lot of positions on healthcare and education and jobs for young people, and even liquor in the
beer and wine in the corner stores.
Beer and wine in the corner stores. It's finally there, right?
It only took another 40 years to happen.
It took 40 years,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Election night, the Tories win the seat count, 52 to 48, but you win the popular vote,
Right.
38 to 37. Bob Rae's holding the balance of power with 25 seats in a minority parliament. Election night, what are you thinking in terms of what's possible?
I thought anything is possible. We were elated. But the important point about that was we had all the momentum. And there was a subplot in that election. Who was going to be the opposition? Would it be us, if we didn't win, or would it be the NDP? And the NDP were sort of, some people thought, oh, they're really, you know, they're going to do these things. And they just were very disappointed. So at the end of that campaign, I was prepared to go back to the people tomorrow. I honestly believe, Stephen, if that campaign had gone on for another week, we would have won it, because the momentum was so great. Momentum matters in politics. And we had it, and we just, those were the halcyon days. Those was a lot of luck, but do not minimize the thought and the work and the energy and the team that went into that, because we had worked full-time day and night for 3 years to put ourselves in that position.
Your team, the Liberals, and a team for the Conservatives start negotiations with Bob Rae and the NDP. Did you have any doubt during the course of those negotiations that Mr. Rae would ultimately back you and make you Premier?
None.
Why did you know?
Because I just know certain things in life. And so you look at the dynamic. The Conservative Party had been torn apart. So we sat there and just watched this happen. So the NDP had half the seats. They were concerned about survival at that point. They didn't want another election. I was the only one that was prepared to take on another election. And we were ready to go. Don't forget, there was a lot of wind in our sails. But I also know you get too much wind in your sails and you get blown over in politics. But we were ready to, but what the NDP wanted was 2 years of stability with no election. That was the only thing they really wanted. Then we were very practical, found the things that we campaigned on together from a similar point of view, and said, okay, we'll do this. They said other things they want to do, and said, we're not doing it. And if you'd rather line up with conservatives, go ahead, sacrifice your soul, and line up with somebody that you dislike even more than us. And that would have been the situation. So it was inevitable it had to come our way.
You and the NDP signed this agreement, this accord, on a number of items, and the Conservatives at the time tried to portray this as somehow unconstitutional, that it was sort of an extraordinary move that usurped the democratic process there, because they'd, after all, won more seats. Were you concerned at all that what you were doing was not kosher?
Not in the least. There's some criticism I get concerned about and some I don't. And that was just sort of a party in retreat at that moment that was using any excuse they could. And they'd gone from this invincible status and stature to having been deeply wounded, not killed, but deeply, deeply wounded. And it was just, from our point of view, just watching them fight it out, we just held their coats and let them fight. And we had to carry on because we knew we were going to government and we knew we had to plan for that. Some of the most complicated legislation this province has ever had, starting with the separate schools issue and other things. We had a very heavy workload and we had to get it right. And I think, Stephen, if you look back at this, you'll say we did by and large.
The first big decision you had to make was a request by Bob Rae to have a picture of the two of you together signing the accord. And you said, no, I'm not going to do that. How come?
Pictures speak loudly in politics, and I didn't want there to be any impression that this was some kind of a coalition or some kind of a mutual government. We controlled the executive. I was prepared to take responsibility for that, and I didn't want, shall we say, spies in our midst. We had to take that responsibility, and we did. And I said, Bob, I said, we're doing this our way. You can support us. You've signed this document, but you're not taking half the blame, so you're not getting half the credit.
What was it like being sworn in as the first Liberal Premier in 42 years?
Well, I didn't bear, the weight of history on my shoulders. I didn't think I was anything special because of that. I thought we ran a pretty good campaign given the circumstances. We'd had a lot of luck. Things went our way. And now we have an opportunity to do what we think is right. And we had a very, very, very detailed and costed campaign strategy and platform. And we set right to work doing it. And it was bold, Stephen. By those standards of the day, it was very bold.
You told the four biggest point sources of sulfur dioxide and thus the cause of acid rain, you told them, you've got to clean up your act, we'll help you do it. In the past, they routinely ignored government when governments told them to clean up, but you made it stick. Why were you not concerned that Inco, Falconbridge, Algoma wouldn't just up and leave?
They did. They threatened me.
They did.
The acid rain thing was tough because we were the biggest sulfur dioxide emitters in the world through the stack. So the president of Inco, Chuck Baird, came from New York. He lived in New York. Came into my office, said, "I'm closing down Sudbury, and if you make us clean this up." And we had a head-to-head confrontation.
What'd you say to him?
I said, we're going ahead with it. I was polite. I didn't call them bad names. I said, we're doing it, and you better accommodate this. And they did.
And then took credit for it.
Well,
boasted about how much they'd improved their
well,
anti-pollution
that's fine.
measures.
That's part of the game in politics. You give credit. What happens in politics, when you win, Stephen, it's always somebody else that did it. When you lose, it's always me that lost. That's the way it works.
The full funding for separate schools, which, again, Bill Davis promised to do, then he retired. It was your government that actually did it. With the benefit of hindsight, you did get the bill through. The separate school system is now funded all the way to the end of high school, unlike as it was when you first came in, which was only to the end of grade 10. In hindsight, was it the right thing to do?
Absolutely, it was the right thing to do. It should have been done from the beginning. Now, are you going to ask me the question, do we need two systems or should we just have one system?
That is the question people ask today.
I'd leave it the way it is. Don't forget, this is part of our history. This goes back to 1867. This goes back to the Grand Compromise of Confederation in Lower Canada and Upper Canada, when Catholics and Protestants compromised, French and English compromised, the civil law system and the common law system. And I think you can justify, even though there's a little waste in it, two systems in the sense that they're a little bit competitive, little competition doesn't hurt, and we are used to it. And I think the harm of putting them together and trying to integrate them would be far greater than whatever minor damage there is having the two of them exist. That would be my opinion. It ain't broke. It's too big a deal and too disruptive to fix.
Let me ask you one more question about this 1985 to 87 period, the 2 years in which you and the NDP are working together through this accord to get some items passed. As you look back on it now, 40 years later, what was particularly fun or exciting about those first 2 years of minority government?
Every single day was fun and exciting. And it was the easiest time I ever had in my whole life. We had an agenda. It was very clear. It was written down on a piece of paper. By the way, that was not the full extent of the agenda. We had a much larger agenda than that. But the things we wrote down, people could understand. We said, we did it, we did it, we did it, we did it all.
Pay equity,
All
affordable
these
housing,
things for
freedom of information.
giving up of extra billing, all these things, tough things, really tough. And we would bring in the legislation. I had very capable ministers. They would consult with the NDP and others, and we'd just sit in the House and watch the NDP and the Conservatives fight. And they would defend us, and we'd say, if the NDP, if you don't like it, we'll have an election. So we always had the backup of going to an election, even though we wouldn't have the accord was not a legal document, it was certainly a moral document. And
Did you ever think of breaking it?
Never.
You never thought, I mean, your polls were very good at the time?
Never, ever. No, we
You
said,
were going to stick to the 2 years.
absolutely. We said we're going to do what we did, and we did it. And we did very much more. And we were, and this was in the context of fiscal responsibility. Don't forget, the Conservatives had never once balanced a budget, ever.
Under Davis.
In 14, they hadn't balanced it since Robarts.
Right.
And so we balanced the budget, and they used Darcy McHugh invented this jiggery-pokery called net cash requirements, which was really a deficit. So they would use different words. So, we cleaned up the books. We paid for a lot of things that they had kept off the books, like Suncor and other things. Paid a lot of pension responsibilities that they hadn't recorded. So we cleaned all that up and had, I think, a progressive run at government.
You fulfilled your 2-year commitment during the accord period. You then called the election for September of 1987, and you won the biggest majority government in Ontario history, 95 out of 100.
Does that still stand?
It does. 90. No one's won 95 seats.
Yeah, but don't tell Doug Ford, because he thought he was going to win more.
He did, but he did not. Your
There
record
you go.
stands, 95 seats. What was the biggest difference in terms of your responsibilities and trying to manage a 48-person caucus versus a 95-person caucus?
Much tougher. The first group was sort of cohesive. We've been through fights together. There was a sense of history. There was a lot of people that ran, and in '87, knowing we were going to win, if they got the nomination, so they wanted to go on a winning team, and then they would like to be cabinet ministers. So it didn't have the same stickiness in terms of loyalty, which is understandable. You want to do things to make it meaningful for everybody and make a meaningful contribution, and not everybody can be in the cabinet. So it took a lot of sensitivity, and I'm not saying I got it right all the time.
Let's talk about one of the other controversial issues that you went after, and that was French language minority rights. At one point, you gave a speech entirely in French?
It was Brockville.
Brockville.
It was a very contentious issue, and you can say, well, other people would have handled this more sensibly or not as aggressively as we did. We brought in a French language bill. I'm not so pretentious to say I'm bilingual, but I think I was one of the first premiers that had a regular French gallery there, spoke in French, and was, again, I wasn't perfect, but
No,
I
you
tried.
scrummed in French. You
I
could do
tried
it.
hard.
Yeah.
And I cared about it. And I had been deeply involved in, I'd studied in Quebec. I'd studied at Trois-Pistoles with my wife and my kids. And I cared deeply about this country. And I understood, I think, in my bones, the differences of Quebec and how important it was, the axis between Toronto, Quebec City, and Ottawa, and keeping this country together. I knew my history. So we wanted to advance French language rights, and it was tough.
I get that, but I wonder how you felt about, for example, Sault Ste. Marie passing a resolution saying we're going to be an English-only community.
I got so goddamn mad about that. I tried not to share that. There was a very offensive mayor there by the name of Joe Fratesi, who traded on all this stuff, and had the French-only resolution just to make people mad. And so, but I didn't want to give him oxygen by just getting in a shouting match with him.
But then Brockville as well.
But then Brockville, I went to
Where
Brockville.
they stomped on the
Quebec
flag.
flag. They burned the flag and stomped on the flag. I went to Brockville to make a speech, and I spoke 100%. I didn't utter a word in English. My entire speech was in French.
Why?
Because I wanted to make the point that this is a bilingual country and we are going to live with each other, and if you don't like it, to hell with you. And it was probably insensitive, but it was my way of making a point that respected Quebec, respected French, but respected minorities. Don't forget, a lot of the respect we have for minorities in this country, and why we are the most multicultural country in the world today, is based on the respect that we built at Confederation, the respect for Quebec, and the respect for putting this country together. Canada is a grand compromise, and we continue to compromise, and we have created the best. Let's not blow it.
Let's talk Meech Lake now. I want to know why you made the decision to make as such an important part of what you wanted to achieve in that second term of yours, getting Quebec's signature on the Constitution, which had eluded the previous group of premiers and Prime Minister Trudeau back in 1982. Why that issue? Why at that time?
It's a long and complicated story, but it goes back to when we had our first meeting on Meech Lake, and don't forget this came out of the Edmonton Declaration. We'd agreed to 5 things to constitutionalize in order to get Quebec's signature on the Constitution. I think it was a heroic achievement in 1982 to patriate the Constitution that Trudeau did, and Bill Davis was part of it, an important part of it. But they signed it without Quebec's signature. Still referred to as the Night of the Long Knives. Even though it isn't a legal impediment in many ways to things Quebec wants to do, it is a scar on the souls of many, many, many people I know in Quebec. It was then, it is now.
Thank you.
And I wanted to remove that.
You got an agreement in 1987. All the First Ministers got an agreement, and at that moment, it set in motion a 3-year time period within which everybody's legislature had to go and ratify the agreement.
Right.
Why would you have allowed, I don't mean you specifically, you generally, all of you First Ministers, why did you allow a 3-year window within which to do that, knowing, presumably, that some governments would change, new governments would come in and might not want to ratify?
It wasn't us. It was the Patriation in 1982 that gave 3 years. We were living with the rules, and it was one of the flaws. I agree with you. If that had been 1 year, I can tell you that would have been the law of the land, and we would have foregone a lot of the pain that this country's experienced, including almost losing the country in the referendum. What happened, we had an agreement in 87, then we had 3 years because of the Patriation in 1982, gave us 3 years to change the Constitution. Mulroney called the meeting. We went for a day and spent a week there, cobbled this deal together. You'll recall that Ontario played a big role in trying to put this together to placate Clyde Wells and others. Everybody agreed to this.
Well, let's talk about this now. You offered to give up Senate seats in order that the percentage of Quebec's representation in the Senate would remain the same and not decrease.
That's right. If we didn't have other constitutional adjustments before that. So I was prepared to give up six seats in the Senate. Who cares? Nobody even knows who they represent anyway. But it was symbolic. It was for Newfoundland, it wasn't for Quebec. Because Clyde's, as Joe Giz said about Clyde Wells,
Premier PEI.
he was premier, he said, your ego is going to destroy this country. It was the toughest speech I've ever heard in my entire life when Joe reamed out Clyde. So we'd all agreed on it. He went home. And then you'll remember the famous roll the dice Mulroney made. It was innocent, but he said we're going to roll. If he had just been quiet, and he had Bill Thorcell and people from the Globe in that office with him, told him all this stuff. If he just kept quiet, Clyde would have probably gone along with it. But
you think
Clyde,
so?
I do.
Yeah.
But Clyde was so fragile, he picked up the knife. He wanted to run the knife through Mulroney because he didn't like Mulroney. And he ran the knife through the heart of Canada. And that's what happened by him turning this down. Don't forget, Newfoundland had approved of the deal under Peckford and then disapproved of it under Wells.
And you went to Newfoundland to speak in the House of Assembly.
We all said, we'll do anything when it is absolutely a cardinal rule of democratic politics. You don't speak in somebody else's legislature. We went. And we were as supplicants. Frank McKenna went, I think Brian did.
Yeah, Mulroney.
I think Grant Devine did, I did. And we went down to St. John's, we went into the legislature and pleaded with them.
Supporters of the Accord, like Ontario's David Peterson, know that anti-Meech sentiment runs deep here. But Peterson came here to tell MHAs to listen to their conscience, not just their constituents.
We cannot be oblivious to public opinion, because that would be arrogant and rude. But at the same time, we can't be dragged down to the lowest level either.
And Clyde was sitting there like Julius Caesar, saying, well, I don't know if I will or I don't know if I won't. Eventually decided not to. And destroyed the Meech Lake Accord, which destroyed trust.
But what about the fact Clyde Wells didn't put it to a vote in the House of Assembly? He didn't even allow it to be voted down.
It just died.
Yeah.
And he had that right. I believe it was a mistake of historical proportions.
Tell me what you thought when you saw Pierre Trudeau coming forward, writing editorials, having press conferences, opposing Meech Lake as well.
I thought there's a time for people in life, a time to get in and a time to get out. It was his time to get out. We just talked about the mistakes of the Patriation in 1982. There was a lot of mistakes. Establishing unanimity to change the Constitution, the 3-year period was way too long. The notwithstanding clause was a compromise he brought in. So I say to Pierre Trudeau, and I did say to him, say, you compromise more than anybody to get the overall extent. This is a compromise to accomplish what we think at this point in time is the most important thing, getting Quebec's signature on the Constitution. And so I say to Pierre Trudeau, you compromise, you don't expect anybody else to. We have to get things done. Keep your mouth shut and out of this one.
Did you ever see or speak to Clyde Wells after all of that years later?
No.
You haven't spoken to him since then?
Clyde, I was so angry. It was it wasn't anger. It was profound sadness.
Shall we go from the sublime to the ridiculous?
Sure. A lot of this stuff I'm talking about was ridiculous.
No. Every government has its scandals, and yours was a particularly intriguing one because the woman at the center of it was a woman named Patti Starr, who worked for a charity and gave what turned out to be illegal campaign contributions to your government, and beyond that was, I guess, caught giving a free paint job and a refrigerator to one of the people who worked for you.
Sorry, I have nothing to say right now.
When you found out about all of this, I mean, in a way it was kind of Keystone Cops, but when you found out about it all, what did you think?
I thought it was nuts. Like, I knew this woman. I didn't know her well. And I remember, I just had bad vibes. I said, you know, just watch this woman. She's going to get you into trouble. But I never transacted with her. I didn't know, and if she gave illegal money to the party, I don't know how much, how much it was. In other words, she had no influence, but it got blown out of proportion. I decided, what the hell, I'll have a judicial inquiry. And she had sort of arranged for some housing or something with, I forget, with Tridel or something. But it was, honest to God, it got absolutely blown out of proportion.
It did, and I wonder why you think that happened, because as you think about scandals in the course of Canadian history, this was fairly penny ante, and yet it turned into a massive thing. As you point out, you called a public inquiry into the thing.
I did that to let the steam off. And I'm not, you look back to the things mistakes I made, I was probably stupid at the time. I wanted to let the steam off. I had nothing to hide. And if one of my staff members made a mistake and didn't pay for a refrigerator, they should pay the price for that, just like I should. But I think maybe I should have just phoned the police, and we did. Say, go investigate, and they found out that she had committed fraud of some description on her charity. So she went to jail.
She went to jail. Yeah.
But I don't think anybody else did. It was, I think, look, the press loves stuff like that. I don't blame them. And this is what press people do, and they keep everybody honest. And so I'm not mad at anybody about it. It was unfortunate, and I guess if I, got rid of everybody that was ambitious around politics, you wouldn't have much left, right? So I look back and say it was too bad, but it certainly wasn't. It was one of the small things in my life, not one of the big things.
I guess in 1989, you start to look at the political landscape. You are being told by your officials at Finance that there is a terrible recession coming. You see a brand new leader of the Progressive Conservative Party who seems quite out of the mainstream. You see the leader of the NDP and you think to yourself, these guys are never going to form government. They never have. They probably never will. A discussion starts to emerge about whether we should have an early election. Can you take us into your thinking on all of that?
This was after the death of Meech Lake. Quebec was going crazy with separatist feeling. I was obviously identified as pro-accommodation, of trying to find some way to keep this country together. I could have seen a situation where I was looking at a situation where I wanted a strong hand to deal with this, because of all the issues that I've ever dealt with in my life, the most important ones are the unity of this country. Now, there was another factor. Marty Goldfarb, who was a pollster, says you can't lose this election, and this is the time to go. So,
well, you're 25 points up at the
time.
time.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So who's so smart? And advised to go and take advantage of this situation because we had a pretty good legislative record. And all the things we did, and so many more, the big issues we talk about, but all these other issues. And so it was to have a strong hand to deal with what I thought was real turmoil ahead in the country. You compound a downturn in the economy with national instability, you got problems.
You go to the media studio at Queen's Park. You are ready to call the election for September 6th, 1990. And some guy comes up to the table where you're sitting and chains himself to the table.
He was chained to a speaker. And I'll tell you is that he's an alderman. He's a
Toronto City Councillor, Gord Perks.
Gord Perks.
What are you thinking as this guy starts to play this recording of what he sees as a bad environmental record?
It was and we're the best environmental record of any government in the country. And yeah, that was Gord Perks. He was an environmental guy.
Did you have any sense that this would be an omen?
Nope. I thought we'd probably get over it, but you know, there were lots of people that. You know, the calling the election was maybe a metaphor for arrogance. I think maybe I was seen as unilateral and arrogant because of the discussions on Meech Lake that we've talked about and other things. I don't think people hated the government. I think people thought we had pretty good government. I think I was the problem.
When you got out on the hustings, protesters, as I've never seen before, started to dog all of your campaign events. And unlike what they do today, which is have security keep everybody away and the leader doesn't deign to go speak to anybody, you went and engaged with the protesters. You went and talked to them. Why'd you do that?
That was just the way I was. I was very open about all this. I could take it. I was a big boy, and you know, if you had to trade barbs with these people, you could do it, and they're entitled to do it. So I wasn't trying to shut anybody out. I wasn't trying to avoid controversy. I thought we could win. Obviously, I was wrong.
Were you concerned that it conveyed the impression of a premier under siege?
Yeah, but sometimes premiers are under siege, and you got to be able to take it.
What went into making the promise to reduce the sales tax?
To get attention. I think it was a mistake. I think it made us look weak. Maybe we were weak anyway, but it was, I don't think it was, in retrospect, a really smart response.
Did you think you were going to lose your own seat?
No, I didn't. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't worry about my own seat one way or the other. In some ways, having lost, I was lucky to lose my own seat.
Cleaner out?
Cleaner out. Look, when we lost, we could see it happening. A decision had to be made. Had to be made fast. And only I could make that decision with Shelley's help. And we sat and say, you know what? You know, we lost. Somebody's got to take the blame for this. It's got to be me. So in a sense, that's how you take the blame. You say, over to somebody else.
Welcome back to our Ontario 90 headquarters here in downtown Toronto. It is early yet. The results have just started coming in, but we are starting to see a trend. The NDP are on their way to victory.
When you saw that the NDP had won a majority government with less than 38% of the vote, What'd you think?
Well, I told you I got very lucky in 85 and 87. Bob Rae got very, very lucky in 1990. And look what happened to his situation. So, you know, there are swings in politics. Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it doesn't. You can blame others if you want, but you got to live with it. If you don't have a thick skin and a reasonably healthy ego, it's the wrong business for you.
This is a very touchy-feely question, but how do you go before the bank of microphones and cameras on election night, having just lost 59 seats and a government that everybody thought would go on for a lot longer, including your own seat, speak in front of that crowd, who are all, of course, very sad and disappointed, and not break down in tears?
Well, you just suck it up. That's all. And you steel yourself and get ready to do what you have to do when you have to do it.
Your post-election cabinet meeting, the last one you would have with your team. Tell us how that went.
I don't have very strong memories of that. I think I just went in and said, sorry guys, and sorry people, it's over to Nixon will be the leader. We had a good run. I'm proud of you. It's my fault, not yours. I'm sorry that some of you lost, and good luck with your lives.
Was there anger at the table?
Somewhere. And, you know, there's no question that some would happy, you know, and nobody likes to face up to losses. But it's part of the moral responsibility. It was my fault. I took, what the heck, who was I going to blame?
I think at this point are you 46 years old at this point?
Something like that.
You're 46, you've lost the best job you're ever going to have. What did you think you were going to do with the rest of your life?
I had no idea. The first job I had, Harry Arthurs, who was the president of York, phoned and said, would you like to come and teach? And it wasn't like I couldn't make a living doing this, but I thought, what a wonderful place to go. So I went to York for a semester and just hung around the students, and I lectured. One week I lectured 30 hours. You won't believe it. I didn't have a course, but the teacher, the profs would come and say, would you come and talk about politics or history, or would you talk about polling or healthcare policy or whatever? It's amazing the amount of knowledge I had in my head, Stephen, having dealt with all these complicated files for a long number of years. And I just enjoyed the energy of being around these kids. So I spent a semester at York, and it was a very happy time to decompress. And then after that, people phoned and said, would you like to do this and join this law firm? And I had a bunch of offers from law firms and various other things. And I've been extraordinarily lucky in my life, the way it's worked out. And we've had a very happy life, and we've moved on. I don't relive the past.
Let me ask you about that. So how long did it take you to get over 1990?
I don't know precisely, probably a year before, you know, you think about it, and occasionally, but then you put your mind to other things. And, you know, you think about things, well, could I have done this differently? And then you quickly dismiss it. And I've learned, and it just takes intellectual and emotional discipline to know that regret is the most useless of all human emotions. And what does it get me? Does it get me a new law practice? Does it get me, advance me in this philanthropic endeavor or that one, or as chancellor of the university? No. And so I'm lucky I have a sunny disposition, in the sense that I see the good rather than the bad most time. Just the way I was born, I think. I don't think there's any great gift. But I'm very lucky, and the most important thing, I have the most wonderful wife on earth, as you know, and I have 3 fabulous children. And so they're the principal source of joy in my life.
Your political career ended, elective political career, at 46. Never a temptation to jump back in, maybe federally, further down the road?
Never. no ambition to be a constant politician. I have an obligation to continue to serve. There's so many things in society that need help and attention and money and concern and need heart. And I just think the happiest people I know are givers, not takers.
Last question. You're 81 years old now. What brings you joy in life today?
Well, number one is my family. I have 7 grandchildren, 3 kids, all married, and they appear to be all very happily married. And to be around them is my greatest joy. I'm still engaged in the law firm. I'm still engaged in a lot of philanthropy, still engaged in a number of businesses. And I work hard to keep fit. I ride my bike, 4 or 5 times, a stationary bike in the winter. I do yoga. I'm a recent convert to yoga. I can't do it very well, but man, it's a good thing to do for old guys like me. And so I try to do that, and with other interests in life, it keeps me going.
David Peterson, thanks for having us here. It's great to see you.
Pleasure.